Hey, everybody, welcome to the Golf EQ podcast. I am Pat Nagel, your host. This is the one-stop shop for everything about golf EQ testing, what we're doing, what we're up to. I'm with Damon Burrow. He is our expertise in golf EQ. And today we are talking about fairway woods, some things about golf balls, everything that's going on new with golf EQ. So we are on episode 3 now. So please, if you are not subscribed, please do that. Subscribe, like our channel so we can grow this thing. We have so much good information for you guys to know about. And, we're going to just keep on going and see where we can go with this thing. So, Damon, please tell us, what's going on new with the fairway woods for this year.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Fairway wood testing has been underway now for a couple weeks. We're kind of making our way through that, running different testers in and out. Fairway woods are interesting. Unlike drivers are fairly straightforward. You're kind of trying to find drivers for people that go long and straight. Fairway woods, there's a little more nuance. So we test both from the ground, the turf, and then also from a tee. And then some of the interesting insights that we've already begun to pull out are some of the differences that the different fairway woods can kind of lend themselves to when players are using them in those different situations. So, for example, it tends to be the case that if a player is going to use their fairway woods more from the ground, fairways, roughs, those kinds of things, compared to the tee, a little more loft has been helpful. And then conversely, if it's coming from the tee, a fairway wood that's set up a little bit more like a driver, so a little bit less loft, around that 13 to 14 degrees, has really produced obviously longer, kind of more penetrating ball flights that really help people. So one of the primary things that you're worrying about as you move down the golf bag is intent and how those golfers are trying to use those clubs. So that's a little bit different than a driver. And then every single one of those things, every single one of those kind of intent-based metrics requires an additional test. So we're trying to get the logistics worked out. We're trying to make sure that we're uncovering all those things. And then obviously with fairway woods, there's just a much wider range of lofts than there are with drivers. So working through all of that too.
So what is that range of loft like? And really, like the main thing, like a lot of times people are hitting their 3-wood, almost as far as their driver, sometimes farther. Like, what is like the benefits of that, and like, what loft should they be looking at?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would argue that if your fairway wood is going as far as your driver, then that means your driver is a fairly poor fit, and we can kind of look at that and tweak that. I would definitely recommend heading up to the driver identifier and seeing that. And as we get to incorporate our loft and lie recommendations into that, and then also into our fairway wood, we'll be able to help players kind of build that balance to where their driver really is kind of long and straight, and their fairway wood is filling a gap so that a lot of their clubs are not becoming redundant. So, they're actually maximizing kind of their potential. So to answer the question directly, as far as what lofts we're testing in fairway woods, the lowest loft we have a 13.5 fairway wood that can get turned down. So we get to roughly 12.75, give or take, depending on kind of manufacturer tolerances. And then we're essentially going all the way up to the top end of 5 woods for this test. So we're going to get roughly to 18 degrees. You can dial it up about 1.5 degrees or so. So roughly 19.5. So we're going roughly, 12.75, let's say, all the way up to 19.5, basically. There's a few nuances that come with that. There's various lie angles that are met in the middle of those things. We're testing a variety of center of gravities at those different lofts. So another thing to keep in mind, loft doesn't exist just in a vacuum. So loft exists kind of as a reaction to the center of gravity of the club. So, in very kind of a simple steps, basically the further back the center of gravity is, the higher the golf club will launch at the same loft compared to that loft at a forward center of gravity. So, we have 19.5 degrees, let's say, in a rearward center of gravity, all the way down to 12.75 in a forward center of gravity. So we do think the launches and the spin profiles of the fairway woods will separate quite nicely. And that's what kind of gives us the entire spectrum of allowing, fits for different players, depending on how they're going to use them. And then kind of, what their swing speeds are, their different angle of attack, club path, fake to path, all these kind of things. Because the other thing that, your question kind of gets at, that's true for a lot of golfers, is depending on their speed and their delivery, It might be true that a 5-wood is actually flying much further than a 3-wood, especially coming from the turf. So we have some of our players that are actually hitting 5-woods further than they're hitting 3-woods when they're laying on the ground, basically. And that's just a product of the loft. So depending on your speed, if you don't have enough loft in your hands, what happens is the ball comes out too low, doesn't fly very far, doesn't have enough spin to stay in the air. So you get this kind of laser beam style golf shot that just falls out of the air quickly, and then is kind of subject to whatever's on the ground. And ultimately that's not the best. So that's another kind of trick that we're playing that some people just really don't know. Some people kind of just grab the stock 3-wood off the shelf. It's 15 degrees, and they kind of go with that, when really kind of that 16 to 17 degree range might be really good for them.
Yeah, and obviously, like hitting from the ground versus hitting from the tee, that's gonna, I feel like, affect like not just how the ball is going to fly, obviously, but like how the person's going to mentally think about that swing and how they're going to do it. So are you testing from both ground and tee?
Yeah, we do both. We do every single club with every single tester from both the ground and the tee. And it's kind of like you said, there are different, both objective, meaning how the ball flight responds to the delivery, and then subjective, meaning kind of how the player responds to the ball being in different positions with different clubs. So like as an example, you get a really kind of shallow faced 3-wood. Let's use Titleist as an example, because they kind of have a nice range. The TS1, or sorry, the TSI1 and the TSI2 from Titleist have a much more shallow face that makes it much easier to kind of hit the middle of the face from the turf, from the ground. Whereas the TSI3 is a little bit deeper, which actually kind of inspires a little more confidence when the golf ball is teed up. So you have a little bit more room to miss high and low when that golf ball is sitting on a tee with kind of the quote unquote deeper faced TSI3 fairway woods. So there's all kinds of nuance that we kind of have to capture, and that's really where it comes back to the intent. We have not found one person yet whose best fairway wood from the tee is also their best fairway wood from the turf. So what you really have to balance when you're trying to fit these is golfers really have to have a pretty good understanding of how they're going to be using this fairway wood. We've got a few testers that never use their fairway wood from the tee. So obviously that group of testers and testers all over the country will be needing their best fairway wood from the turf, whereas their best fairway wood from the tee will be completely irrelevant. And then vice versa, we've got golfers that basically only exclusively use a 3-wood from the tee to lay back on shorter par 4s, or to maybe hit a slightly different shot shape than their driver promotes, that kind of thing. And in that case, you would completely flip the convention. You would give them what's best from the tee and almost neglect what's best from the turf.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, some players, not hitting fairway wood off the tee. Is that like information you would want them to know about going into the identifier? And like,
yeah,
is there like a ratio, or is there a percentage? Like, what should they know?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, what you should know is arguably you should know which one you're going to use it more for, because it's not like any of these clubs aren't effective at the other one. They're just not quote unquote your best, right? So it's not like any of the fairway woods are built only to go on the tee or only to go on the turf. It's just some have different geometric characteristics that make them better suited for one role or the other, depending on the player's delivery. So there is no one fairway wood that is exceptional from the tee, but is really awful from the turf. For example, most of the time what ends up happening is you'll get one that's really good from the tee and kind of middle of the road from the turf, or you'll get one that's really good from the turf and kind of middle of the road from the tee. And then so what golfers really could kind of have an idea about before they kind of come in and take our identifier is roughly, are they going to be using the fairway wood more from the tee or the turf? As long as you kind of have, let's say anywhere above 50%, as in like, 51 or more percent of the time going to be using this from the tee, or 51% or more of the time going to be using this from the turf, then we can really kind of get you dialed in. If you really don't know, that's okay. Then what you say is like, I don't know. And then we just assume that basically your ratio is more like 50-50. And then we fit you for essentially the club that would score your highest out of the two balances, basically. So we're not going to give you an extreme in one case or an extreme in the other case. We're going to give you kind of, let's call it a B+ in both. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Good grade. Yeah. So in terms of like distance and accuracy, like what should that golfer be more concerned about with fairway woods? Like I imagine there's more that are more forgiving than others. Like you were mentioning, the smaller club face coming out lower and higher, that sort of thing. Um, you know, and obviously it's going to be club path and all this other things coming into play. But what should the golfer be more concerned with when getting a fairway wood? Should it be accuracy or distance?
It's a great question, and the answer is it depends. So it's highly dependent on the golfer, and it's highly dependent on their golf swing.
Yeah.
So typically, as just a kind of general blanket statement, the more consistent a golfer is with their face to path delivery, meaning the angle that they present with their club path and then their consistency of club face, that person can prioritize distance because they're almost taking care of the accuracy themselves. You know, they may hit it to the right more often or to the left more often, but generally speaking, those patterns will cluster. And so those golfers will have a better ability to kind of dial in where they need to aim and then subsequently where their golf shots are going to land. So that person can squeak out a little bit more distance if they want to. Whereas if a person kind of has an erratic strike pattern and an erratic face to path control, which happens in the higher handicaps, that person needs to prioritize higher launch and what we would call a more accurate build. So those people are going to want to, you know, kind of give themselves quote unquote as much help as possible. There is also another caveat that we have to consider in that if players have really high club head speeds and almost, you know, what we would consider a textbook delivery, sometimes fairway woods go too far. So you also have to dial it back because you really don't want fairway woods running into your driver. You know, the fairway wood is kind of built to do a very specific role. And so those players, while I wouldn't necessarily call it prioritizing accuracy, you would prioritize hitting a specific number. You know, for example, if you have a driver that because of your delivery, you're carrying it, let's call it 270, and it's rolling out to somewhere in the 285 range, you don't also want to build a fairway wood that's going to give them basically those same numbers. You know, you want that fairway wood sitting back around like maybe a 250 carry rolling out to like 265. That way they're not building kind of redundancy in their club. So in those
what would
players,
you do for them? What would you do for them to like achieve that? Would it be the loft of the club head?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, usually it's just loft. Usually it's something like giving that person a 16 to 16 and a half degree 4-wood versus a, you know, traditional 3-wood, or going with a 3-wood at 15 degrees that's slightly further back in the center of gravity. So it's just promoting a little bit higher launch, a little bit higher spin, so that you're not really getting those driver-like flights, but you're getting more of a, you know, if you will, on the spectrum, their fairway wood becomes more like, you know, a iron. It's higher. It's kind of coming in with a steeper descent angle. They can hold a lot of greens, those kind of things. You know, think about, you know, PGA Tour players get into this in like their 5-wood, you know, long iron set of their bag. You know, they've got to attack some pretty tough pins. They're going into greens that are very fast. So they need that higher launching fairway where they can stop on the greens. So we're considering, you know, all that. People, you know, playing ability and your ability to control your delivery has a massive influence on kind of what you're trying to optimize for. So,
yeah. So I know we're talking about woods today, but I kind of wanted to address hybrids and seeing what those differences are. If you feel like if the hybrids are more for the higher handicap players, or you know, if it can really be for anyone, if it's for certain situations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's something that next year we're going to explore in depth. So what we really have to know before we can kind of begin to fit hybrids, and really even somewhat before we can, you know, with our highest level of accuracy, fit fairway woods as well, is what is the difference in a fairway wood at 18 degrees versus a hybrid at 18 degrees. And there are some, you know, very general things that are highly consistent across those two things. So as a you know, kind of an outline, hybrids tend to have smaller club heads. They tend to be a little bit more forgiving in the sole, depending on where you're coming from. So like golfers often find them a little more friendly to hit out of the rough compared to the larger headed fairway woods. But there are some trade-offs that come with that. The faces are a little bit smaller. So in a vacuum, quote unquote, you get a little bit less forgiveness across the face. Forgiveness is very hard to measure. I don't really love that word, but you get a little bit less resistance to twisting. So MOI is kind of the actual measure that you can.
So you're saying the club turning in the rough.
Yeah, exactly. Or that, or just in reaction to striking the golf ball on different parts of the club face. So if you
Okay.
hit it out of the toe, for example, equivalent strikes, your fairway wood's going to outperform your hybrid. All other things being equal most of the time. Now it's always player specific, so that's going to depend.
Yeah.
The other thing that's an issue with hybrids for a lot of people are if you deliver the golf club kind of from the inside, so inside to out, if you hit a lot of draws, if you hit heavily down on the hybrids, those kind of things, the lie angles can become too upright, and people often miss with hooks or overdraws with a
Mhm.
hybrid. So that's when you would really favor somebody with a fairway wood or even a driving iron, or you would position them with a hybrid that allows them to go flat in the lie angle relative to standard. So it's a bunch. So it's a bunch of those things. But the reality is, hybrids and fairway woods have to be balanced, and they almost should be fit kind of in unison. What eventually what we're going to get to the point of, and what the ultimate goal of club fitting really is it's not just building one section of the bag, it's building the entirety of the bag. So driver all the way down to wedges. How are you blending those things? How are you giving yourself the best chance to score from anywhere on the golf course, but especially the areas of the golf course where you're ending up most often? So again, it goes back to that intent. If you're a golfer that really struggles out of the rough, you may prioritize the hybrids over the fairway woods. If you're a golfer that feels very comfortable out of the rough, or you don't like hitting either out of the rough, you're always going to hit an iron, then you might favor the higher lofted fairway woods. And these are all things that, as we collect more and more data in each subcategory of those clubs, we'll be able to help identify for golfers and then help kind of recommend them down the right path.
Sure. Yeah, 2022 should be information that you're going to have, in the identifier software and everything is going to be really beneficial for people moving forward.
Yeah, we think so. We think we're giving people what we can give them as we can give it to them. What we're trying to do takes a lot of data, it takes a lot of shots, and we have to prioritize accuracy. So until we can do things with high levels of both confidence and repeatability for kind of all the diverse golf swings that we're trying to be able to cater to, we simply don't want to roll it out. And each one of these parameters have to be evaluated independently. So we have to do a separate study for lie angles. We have to do a separate study for lofts. We have to do a separate study for hybrids, a separate study for fairway woods. So it just takes time. There's some logistics involved that, it takes several hours to get this many testers in to have them hit this many shots and that kind of thing. So we're really excited for what we're going to be able to do in 2022.
Yeah. So good segue. What else are you going to be getting into besides fairway woods? We're talking about the whole bag. What's next?
Yep. Yeah. So this year, after we round out fairway woods, we think that's going to take us into roughly October. And then to finish out this year, we're going to do golf balls. So the golf ball is really important. Obviously, we have everything set up to do the golf balls. So we're going to round out this year with golf balls.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of this year, there's going to be high level driver identifiers for drivers, fairway woods, golf balls, and golf accessories. So rangefinders, golf bags, golf grips, that kind of thing.
Cool.
Going into 2022, immediately as soon as the 2022 drivers sets are released, we'll drop those in, we'll get those tested. And then if everything stays on track for 2022, we're looking at drivers, fairway woods, hybrids, including driving irons, wedges, putters, and then rounding out with the golf ball again.
Cool. Speaking of golf balls, we're talking about the Vero X1s. What's the latest, your review, I guess we should say, what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, we were very impressed with Encore's new Vero X1. So we put the Encore Vero X1 directly kind of head to head against Pro V1 and Pro V1X. And I think surprisingly to most people, not only did it stand up to both those golf balls, it outperformed both those golf balls. Now I will say with the caveat that it did not significantly outperform the Pro V1X. And what that basically means is the differences were so small that you wouldn't tangibly see the differences on the course. So you would make the argument that neither the Vero X1 nor the Pro V1X is better than the other. You would call them essentially the same on a per golfer delivery, of course. But notably, both of those golf balls did significantly outperform the Pro V1 for the golfers we had in that test. And we do have a little bit of intuition as to why that is. So number one, usually firmer golf balls do give you the potential for higher ball speeds. So for golfers that are swinging, let's say above 100 miles per hour, that kind of tends to be the cutoff. It's not it's not just swing speed, but that kind of is a pretty good governing rule. You kind of need to be transitioning into that firmer golf ball just so you can get that extra ball speed and kind of extra launch distance, that kind of thing out of it. The Pro V1 compared to the Pro V1X is a little bit lower launching and a little bit lower spinning, which is good, for kind of your quote unquote average golfer. People swinging below 95 miles per hour, people that kind of need this ultimate blend of distance and accuracy. Pro V1X is a little bit higher launching, a little bit higher spinning. It does create a little bit more distance for some people, a lot more speed based on that kind of higher compression. Vero does something very interesting. Vero kind of separates the two. So Vero, in our tests and kind of in robot testing that Encore has seen, their golf ball is what you would consider a high launch, low spin. So it separates launch and spin. And when you do that, you can really unlock some interesting fits for people. And what I mean by that is, it's going to get technical for just a little bit, but giving somebody lower launch and lower spin is pretty easy. You can just hand that person a club with less loft. Conversely, giving that a different golfer higher launch and higher spin together is, again, fairly easy. You just give that person more loft. So you can tweak, if you need to give them both low, low, or high, high, you can do that very easily with a club adjustment. So a little bit more loft, a little bit less loft, really get you dialed in. But separating those two is much harder. So giving somebody high launch, low spin, or low launch, high spin is much different because it takes more than just tweaking the physical parameters of the golf club. And that's where the profile of the golf ball really kind of comes into play. And I think you've seen responses in other companies to this. So kind of the original, what I would consider high launch, low spin golf ball in the last, 3 to 5 years, it's really made its way into the kind of, flagship realm is TaylorMade's TP5X. So that golf ball was extremely high launch, extremely low spin, all things considered. And what people found is it gave them some extra distance in their irons, especially, which can make a big improvement in their game. And then I think you've seen other companies like Titleist react to that with their addition of the Titleist Pro V1X Left Dash, which is, more technically speaking, a higher launch, lower spin golf ball, at least compared to the Pro V1X. And that's kind of that small avenue where I think the Vero X1 really excels, is in the separation of those two. You can kind of unlock some potential for some golfers that wouldn't otherwise be able to get it.
Yeah. So, we touched on this the last episode, talking about golf balls and, playing the same type of golf ball. Like, what is we could just touch on it here, but what's the importance of that exactly?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's something that the players don't often think about. A lot of golfers just kind of play the golf ball they find behind the tree. They lose theirs, they come out and play with it, and depending on where you're at in your kind of golf journey, that may be okay, or it may not be. If you're somebody who is trying to break 100, for example, playing those found golf balls might be okay. It may not be giving you a big enough performance decrease that you're really too concerned with it. Alternatively, if you're a golfer that doesn't have a lot of discretionary income to spend on the sport and you have to save money wherever you can, then playing found golf balls can be a great way to do that. What we recommend, though, what we consistently see time over time, is playing the same golf ball throughout your bag gives you higher levels of consistency, higher levels of repeatability, and then higher levels of predictability. And what that means is every time you hit a golf shot with a golf ball that what's going to happen, you can estimate what's going to happen much better and then hit better shots. So, for example, if you know that every time you hit a certain golf ball, it's going to fly 150 yards with your 7-iron, let's say, then every time you're 150 yards out from the flag, you can pick your 7-iron. If all of a sudden you have one golf ball in your bag that flies 155 yards with your 7-iron and one that flies 145 yards with your 7-iron, then depending on the distances, now you have to start guessing. You have to consider one more variable. It becomes very difficult. Green side is another area where some golf balls have lots of spin coming off the wedges. Some golf balls have very little spin relative coming off the wedges. So then you have to start thinking about, well, now, depending on what golf ball I'm playing, how close can I chip this to the hole? Do I have to land this on the front of the green, let it roll out? Can I fly it halfway there? Do I have to fly it 3/4 the way there? Those kinds of things. And like I said, for golfers that really, struggle just making contact with their wedges, that's going to matter a lot less. But as you really start to do everything you can to shoot your best scores one of the biggest variables is the golf ball. And you have to keep that consistent, not only, kind of within a round, but then round over round, so that your play is kind of translating in the way that you think it should.
The biggest variable and probably the least thought of, right?
Yeah, it's also very, very difficult.
Something that is just, it's there 1 minute and then it's gone.
Yeah.
You can lose it just like that. So
Yep.
people, I don't think, have that same attachment to the golf ball as they do to their clubs.
Yep.
So it's definitely something they need to think about. Cool. Well, that's all the questions I have for you today. Appreciate your time, Damon. This was great. So you guys, again, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to our channel and like it. That's only going to help our growth and will help you learn more, everything there is to know about Golf EQ. Visit the website, www.golf-eq.com. Get on the identifier. If you haven't been to any club fitting or anything like that, if you can get some information there, that would only help your way through the identifier. And as always, reach out to Damon. He is very knowledgeable in all this stuff, as we know. So again, Damon, thank you for your time, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Thanks, Pat.